Stan Gibson, thank you so much for joining me here today on the Uncharted Leader podcast. I have been really enthralled, curious, and excited to get into this conversation with you today. All the way from, are you in Arizona today or?
I'm in Illinois, which is the middle of the United States, but my wife and I normally are in either Arizona or Florida. Again, we love palm trees over pine trees, so warm weather is our normal enjoyment in life.
And given that I am in the other side of the world, what is the weather like there at the moment?
Anything below 70 starts to get cold for me. And it is about 35 degrees here. So, and that's really not that bad. We grew up in this part of the country, so it's not that bad, but it is 35. How about with you?
Oh, it is beautiful. It is the middle of summer. We had a scorching hot day here yesterday, and we're expecting the same for the next week. But then somehow we're going to be hit with some pretty cold, bad weather next week, which will be interesting. So, now, Stan, I have one simple question before we get into our conversation today, which is going to cover a range of topics around servant leadership, balancing work life with home life, well-being, and your illustrious career and the impact you've had with leaders. But I want to start with one simple question because people are often very time poor. And, it's important, I think, for them to get a real insight into the value of the work that you do and why it's really, the value for them and why it's truly important, what makes you unique. So could you tell us, we're heading down a lift. Could you give us your 30 seconds of what is the thing that makes you do what you do?
Sure, Kylie. You know what? It's transformation and growth. It always has been for me. And, I think if you're living in a land of comfort, you just never venture out and find a way to grow. And so I've been blessed in life working with a lot of clients, and I just love seeing either individuals or teams just grow. There's just a glow in their face and a glow on mine. That's why I do what I do.
That's fantastic. Well, the two G words I got from that, growth and glow. So, folks, growth or glow, if you're up for that, then stay tuned because that's certainly what you're going to get out of today's conversation. And I do want to ask you about that, Stan, specifically because you did just mention getting out of the comfort zone. We know that growth does happen in that space, but when you just said it, then maybe it's because what I'm going through also when I know that I'm going through a new phase of growth that I was like, when you in before you step out into that world of being in the uncomfortable area, right, to experience growth, one would think, and this is probably the illusion I've probably experienced myself too, is that you seem to think that somehow that's comfort. But in fact, my experience has been that when you're in that zone and you're not getting in the uncomfortable zone, it can actually be more paralyzing if you stay there. Because suddenly, if you're not going forward, and I know there's some science about this too, about the way the brain works, that if you're not creating from a future or stepping into a future state for yourself, then you default to the past. And that can sometimes be a very challenging space. What are any thoughts about that?
Well, Callie, you hit on a lot of things there, but I think it's very true. And sometimes it's kind of like we've all heard the analogy of the frog boiling and stuff like that. They don't know they're boiling until if you throw them into a hot scalding water, then they jump out. But if it just goes up 1 degree incrementally, then you know what, they just stay in there and they eventually die. And that's what a lot of people do. And I'm no different. And I work with executives all over on we got to get uncomfortable. I was just with a client yesterday, and I said, you are not uncomfortable yet. You want this transparency and you want all of this, you feel like the company isn't moving fast enough. Well, you're not moving fast enough. You're not uncomfortable yet. So, it's one of those things that we almost have to be prodded into it, Kali. I really believe that, I was 2 years ago, I'll admit I was in the corporate world. I was in the corporate world and I was also an entrepreneur, but I was working for a large Fortune 150 company for about 15 years. And it wasn't by my own design. I had risen up the ranks, but they were going through a massive downsizing. And it was a great timing for me to exit the company. I had planned on it a couple of years, but they put it on the table for me right then and there. And that's what it took. It took, that actual, some outside stimuli had to happen for me to go ahead and then jump, into the deep waters. And when you do, it's like, why didn't I do this earlier? Oh my goodness. It's fun, but it's so scary when you just think about it. So
Mm.
that's a roundabout way of answering your question, Cal.
I think that's great because, so I had a very similar experience when I left the corporate world myself, and I was actually working in the area of transformation at the time, and we were going through one of the biggest restructures so I worked at News Corp, and the media industry had been going through a massive transformation for a period of about a good 10 years. We'd been dealing with a lot of mergers and acquisitions and restructuring and more restructuring and more restructuring. And in the end, because I'd been in the business for a good 20 years, so I had a lot of value to the organization because of very few people were able to see that depth in the business. So it had a lot of value because of the ability to make some big changes. And then at one point, it's so funny you say the thing about stepping out and where you end up, because I had a friend of mine say the same thing. What are you doing in here? You need to get out of here and get out of your comfort zone. And no. And to be honest, Stan, I was pissed. I was like, who the hell do you think you are? Like, so living up to my, I'm not, like that. And I kid you not, I was standing out front of the office and I was just about to walk in the door. And by the time I'd actually got to the gates where we passed through, I was like, you know what? I think he's right. Oh my God. Now I was fortunate because I was like I was like, well, how do I make this happen without it kind of being a bad thing for me? Right. So I did manage to kind of hoodwink my boss to give me I don't think you should keep me in the business. You pay me too much money. You could pay somebody a lot less. Da, 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 da.
Oh, you and I have the same story then, because it was like, and the thing is, and I hope your listeners take note of this, is that because I have a lot of people right now, a lot of people are kind of entering that. I'd like to retire, but I don't know if I can, and if I do, I don't know what I'll do. And I'll tell you what, people say, when did you leave, the corporate world? And I say, well, formally, I left it in February 25th of 2021. But while I never cheated them, 10 years earlier, I had started doing a lot of motivational speaking around the country on my own time. I had started researching neuroscience about leadership and putting together all of the elements to write a book during the pandemic called Living a Rich and Intentional Life. I had put together a website. I had done all the plan B stuff. I was coaching executives before work and after work, and then using, the company I was in almost as a laboratory, because I had a really good sized team. We did a lot of global work, and just practicing my own leadership, what's working, what's not working. And so I had a plan B in place for about 10 years, Callie. And so when they say, when did you leave, there was a pretty massive exit of a lot of people on that February 25th, and there was a lot of tears for most people. I set up shop at 8 o'clock the next morning and never missed a beat. And I should have taken time off, but I was so excited. I was ready to go at 8 o'clock the next morning, and I already had the name, the LLC, and everything. So always be thinking of plan B, whether you're ready for it or not. It may happen on your terms or maybe not.
That's great. So I do want to come back to something you did mention there about the book that you've written called Living a Rich and Intentional Life. I do love the sound of that. What inspired the book?
Well, there's always good stories to go, but actually about that time I said 10 years ago, I started doing some motivational speaking. But my wife and I were sitting at a restaurant, and a friend came by. And this wasn't just any friend. This is like a guy that he's CEO of a financial company. He has foster children. He and his wife have a marriage ministry across the world. He's a friend. I mean, he is a friend. And he comes over, and we hadn't seen him in 2 years. And so he comes over and we talk a little bit and just hadn't caught up. Hey, nice to see you. Okay, he walks off. About 5 minutes later, excuse me, he walks right back around the corner and he looks at us and he says, I feel like I should tell you, but I've got cancer and I've got a 50-50 chance of living the next 5 years. And when he said that, I mean, you don't know what to say, Kylie. I mean, you're dumbstruck, you're this, you're that. And he looked at us and he said, oh, no, no, no. I didn't come over to make you feel bad. I came back over to tell you that while I wish I didn't have this diagnosis, it's been the best 3 months of my life. He said, I have started to delegate and I have stepped out as CEO of the company and I'm now chairman and I am now working 3 to 4 days a week versus 6 to 7. I'm having conversations with my wife we've never had before in our 40 some years of marriage. I've taken all my kids on separate vacations. And I've asked him, what do you want from dad before he leaves? And then he looked straight in my eye, Kylie, and he said, you know what, Stan? When death becomes certain, life becomes rich.
Mm.
When death becomes certain, life becomes rich. And when he said that, there was something about that intentionality. And fortunately, that was 12 years ago. And his name's Jerry, and Jerry's still living. But I will tell you, I've shown him all the work that I've done in neuroscience. My book is really rich in how to take care of you because I believe that you have to be a little selfish as a leader to be very selfless and a self-servant leader. I don't mean to take over the mic here, but I would just give you another similar story here. What I mean by being a little selfish is about 5 years ago, my wife of 41 years was diagnosed with cancer. And she was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was stage 4. It was in her bone marrow, and it was very devastating, extremely devastating. And our minds are going left, right, up, down. What do we do? I still got responsibilities in the corporate world. My team, we manage $2 billion worth of real estate globally. I've got board commitments. I've got this. I've got that. But it just all the things I had been telling all of the other people I was coaching came back to me. And it said, if I don't take care of me, I can't take care of her.
Mm.
I can't take care of the people at work. I can't take care of all my responsibilities. And so all of a sudden it was like, I got to be up at 5 or 5:30 in the morning. I've got to have mind, body, and soul. I've got to meditate. I've got to work physically. I've got to be spiritually right. I've got to be ready to take on everything the rest of the day. And then I've got routines in the evening that will ensure me to get the best sleep. So a lot of my book goes into how do leaders take care of themselves so that they can take care and be servant leaders.
I just love that. That is I think, a very important message, and an important message for the illusion that somehow, and I think a misinterpretation on many respects about leadership, that we do talk about leadership being about others, and it is. But you're right. It is impossible to lead authentically, and I know the areas of trust and authenticity are something that are also very dear to your heart. But being able to lead authentically is to say that in service of somebody else, then one certainly does need to be able to take care of oneself, because it is up to us to be able to take care of ourselves. The person who's there to empower you as a leader is not there to tell you what to do or to ensure that they're able to take care of you. Your job is to take care of yourself. So I think it's a very, as you go, especially for those who, well, oh God, I mean, I was about to say, especially for those who are in the pipeline of leadership and about to go down that path, to make sure you set yourself up well for that. But let's be frank, right? It's actually important for everybody, even those that are very, seasoned executives, to be reminded, because sometimes it's very easy to stop and put other people's needs first.
Oh, absolutely. One of the sayings that I have, and I think people get tired of me saying it, but I say, if you're not well at home, you're not going to be really effective at work. And if you're not really good at work, you're not going to be effective at home. It's a holistic picture.
Mm.
And so like I've got a client, she's an executive, and she things aren't going very well at home. And there's personal problems, and it leads to poor sleep, and it leads to poor habits, and it leads to and while she is forging through at work, we have to work on that home front. And this is something else, Colleen. I'd be interested in your 2 cents on this. When I talk to a lot of leaders about, do you even talk to your employees about, are you sleeping well? How are
Mm.
things going at home? And I realize that some people have nutrition problems, and you don't want to get too deep, but I believe the stronger we can work with the people that we work with and spend most of our time with about their habits of, are you getting enough sleep? are we meeting, exercise? You're working at home more. Are you getting what you need? How can we be a better company and make sure that you're healthy and that you're bringing your best version to work? I don't know about you, but I feel like we're missing out on a lot of those conversations, and that's what brings authenticity and trust.
Absolutely. And I will chime in on this one because I certainly what I can see in the conversations I've had with people that are in leadership, the thing that I've noticed they say when I ask them about this kind of thing, because for me it's the same, Stan. Certified in the neuroscience of resilience, which is what I use when I'm working with leaders because it is a holistic view
Yep,
on
I do too.
what you need to do, right? And health is one of the 6 strategies, which includes sleep, nutrition, and movement. And it's interesting because when I have asked them about what stops them, like, are you talking about this? Well, number one, firstly, that Stan is they're not dealing with it themselves for the most part.
Right.
They're not bringing that for themselves. Therefore, it's not in the space for them with others.
Great point.
And then the second thing I notice is for those that are very good at doing it, they don't ask. And here's the thing that shows up is because there is a narrative that they have or a belief that it's not their business to be asking about their staff's personal life. And I really get that. I know that often as leaders we go, gosh, I shouldn't be talking about their personal life. Like, what business of mine? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I totally get that. But I think this is probably why we are at a place where a lot of the work that's now happening within leadership is not so much about the practicalities or the frameworks of a leadership model and, systems and structures and all that you find that people like you and I and many others in the world who are now, when you talk about leadership development with them, it really is more holistic. And so I just think that we are on a journey, and that's why people like yourself and myself are doing the work we're doing, because we know that actually that's where we're going to start to get the change happening.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. There's one other saying that I've really kind of coined about 6 months ago, and I just said, when leaders learn to coach, employees learn to lead. And the reason I believe that is because, sometimes you get promoted because you're the smartest person in the room with, that specific, task. And when you get there, it's kind of a hit of dopamine when people come to you and, hey, how do we solve this? And you are able to solve it. And, you feel good about yourself, but you're not doing anybody any good by not coaching and by not, taking, asking. What we're doing is we're enabling, as you know. And then we wonder why we're getting complacency and we're not getting people stepping forward. So
Mm,
I really believe, and that's one of the things that is a challenge for me because working with executives on listening skills and working with them on how to ask the right questions and how to go deeper, how to make sure you know the why. You almost have to ask that why 3 times before you get to the root of the problem. And we're so busy today, we don't have time for that. And we just kind of just move from one crisis to the other. So I don't know. I think it's going to be what's worked in the past isn't going to work in the forward. That's the one thing I know.
yeah, 100%. Look, I just want to go back to something you just mentioned then as a really important topic, I think, for no matter where you sit in the business. And that is when leaders learn to coach, employees learn to lead. And I'm interested in a little bit more about the work you're doing specifically to have that happen because, and from a context of those who or in the employee space, for example, because my view, one of the views and beliefs that I have, which is why I'm here, is because, I think that we are in an era that requires a transformation inside of the workplace to ensure that leadership is something that gets expressed regardless of whether you ever have a formal position or authority. Because there's in an organization the size of, let's say, even 1,000 people, right? There's 6 positions at the top. So, look, if your ambition is to be at the top and you're waiting to be at the top before you express leadership, that ain't going to go so well. Now, you might be one of the lucky ones. In my era, I happen to be one of the lucky ones. So, but I very quickly learned that that's not going to serve everybody because we're now in a world where we have people are more educated, more creative, and waiting until that happens is waiting for, I don't know, the sun to come out, but so I'm curious because I want people and employees, if there's far more employees, if we can teach them then if they're stepping up to lead, that is sure, in my view, going to make it a lot easier for executives to be able to step back such that they can coach. So back to you about this, and the work you're doing specifically with the executives to help them do this. What are you seeing as some of the important lessons or even insights that you're getting from executives as they do this work?
But the one thing I have really been trying to advocate as well is I think that the C-suite, or at least the leadership team, should always say, you know what, we are always going to guarantee employability. But I didn't say employment.
Mm.
You can't guarantee employment in today's age, but you can guarantee employability. What does that mean? That means, you know what? That means we care about you. That means, again, we go back to our conversation we've been having for 30 minutes. We're going to care employability. We're going to make sure we know who you are at your best version. A lot of the work that we do around authenticity and trust is, we work with people because I think one of the foundations is just having a good assessment, just to say, who am I and who am I not? And when you start to have that self-awareness, Kylie, and when you have that self-awareness, for if it was you and I, it's one thing for me to know me. It's another thing for me to know you, because we might have very much the same skill set that can probably rub each other the wrong way. And having that knowledge is so important, because once you know that, then you can start to have healthy conflict. But until you know and have great self-awareness, will you be able to develop trust and authenticity? And, I don't know what you use, but, I use a combination, but I do use a lot of strength finders. And for a lot of people that don't know strength finders, the reason I use that is because I work with somebody else who's we've worked with a lot of industrial psychologists to take strength finders and almost turn it upside down. And so those 5 strengths, for your listeners that maybe don't know, there's 34 attributes, and you wake up with 5 of them every morning, and they are your gift. They are just you. And the thing about it is, those 5, we take those 5, and we have developed questions around each 5 that will then help us get even more clarity. So, for example, one of those is strategic. And yours might be strategic, Kylie, but my strategic and your strategic probably don't look alike. And so once you start to define and get really narrow on what my strategic looks like, and there's a sentence attached to it, and I can have 4 other sentences for my other strengths. Now I have a paragraph. I have a paragraph of who Kylie Stone is at her best, her absolute best. And the thing we always know is that those 5 strengths, if you're not doing well, if you're under stress or whatever, those 5 strengths become your kryptonite. They become your weakness. And we go through a similar exercise to know what your kryptonite paragraph looks like. So, I'm working with a team right now, a global team, and we're sitting down and we're just breaking bread, and we're just saying, let's just get real with one another. We work with each other for 3, 4, 5 years, but do we really know each other? And you know what? You've been rubbing me the wrong way. Why is that? Oh, that's why. You know what? That wasn't malicious. And then you start to get into some healthy confrontation and conflict because you trust the person across the table from you. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's a little bit about how I'm working with people on guaranteeing employability and guaranteeing that, let's break down the barriers and let's develop trust for the first time in this organization.
Yes, it does makes a lot of sense. In fact, two things where I want to go now. It's a bit of a segue here. One is the word authenticity itself, and I've noticed that sometimes, as a human being, not much like the Strengths Finder, and how we'll have a different spin on being strategic, for example. Different people have a different view on what being authentic actually looks like. So can you shed some light for your, I guess either where the passion for you in being authentic came from in your personal experience, and what your view about being authentic looks like?
Wow, Kylie, I don't think I've ever had anybody ask me that question.
Great. I love that. Fantastic. Well,
You stumped me, but I will tell you, it's one of those things. I don't know that I can give you a perfect definition, but
what does it mean to Stan? I mean, what does
to,
it mean to
to
you, Stan?
To me, it's I'm bare my soul with people say you share too much. I don't think so. I don't think so. You know what? I want people to know me. And
Mm,
I want to know you. I really want to know you. Because you know what? If we're just meeting each other on the surface, you know what? We can do that all day long. But you know what? I really think that it's just a new era as we go forward. And we really need to start caring about one another. Well, I worked in a company that was 300,000 employees. Well, I grew up in a
wow.
town of 5,000. So I'll tell you what, I, I didn't know there were 300,000 people in the world.
Wow.
So to get to know 300,000 people is obviously not going to happen. But I will tell you what, I made sure that everybody that I came into contact with, I took the time to get to know them. And I'll tell you
Mm,
what, as a leader, I had a cadence of, the people that reported to me, we met. I mean, we had it in the calendar, twice, 2 to 3 times a month. And we talked. The first 15 to 20 minutes had nothing to do with business. Oh, how's things going at home? What's howning? How's Bob doing? How's your, we went through this conversation. And then the people that were kind of removed from me 2 or 3 or 4 steps, I met with them every 60 days or 90 days. But I wanted to know about them. I wanted to know about their family. And I wanted to know about mine.
mm, mm,
And when you start to do that, then people say, you know what? I know the Stan's going to make some decisions that I'm not going to like, but I know his heart.
mm.
And that's authenticity.
Mm. Yeah, so great. When you were sharing the part about where you being raised in a community of 5,000 and then working in a company like that, I was like, that's a very big mission to get to know everybody from that point of view. So but I see the value, right? Because it's in who you're being as a human being, regardless of the number of people that you do touch and or not. But the other thing that I was reminded of then, Stan, was that. And I've noticed this happen a lot when even when I post a quote about something, I notice that when there's a particular quote about our beliefs or the way we live life, what I notice for myself is that it resonates with me because it taps into a need for me to feel that that is present when it's not. So if I see something like, oh, it's important to have love in the world and love in leadership, I go, yeah, that's important because I can see for myself, it's been a lesson that I've had to learn for myself, not having that be present. So for me, being authentic, if I look at that conversation you just shared, it's interesting because it occurs to me that being in a community like that of 5,000 people, that you would have very close relationships with people because you know each other very well, which sets you up for being that kind of human being. I, on the other hand, Stan, I think I had to find a very hard lesson on this one because I had the very opposite upbringing. My mother was only 16 when I was born, and I did not know my father. We moved around a lot, so much so that I went to 12 different schools in 13 years. So it was a very, we came from very humble, I'll say, is use the word, beginnings. And so I have to be reminded of that at times by the people in my own community because the way in which I've lived my life doesn't seem to be congruent with that. Like I've obviously used that to build strength, but for me, Stan, the authentic part about that was the impact that it had on my brain wiring and the way that I had thought was quite a shock to me. And the shock was that I was petrified of other human beings. Petrified. So almost the opposite. I'm like, yeah, don't put me out there. Like, I'll sit behind the scenes. Thank you very much. Like, do not. No. Why? Well, because I'm petrified of other humans. Really, deep down, authentically, I am afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of being attacked. Afraid of being, shamed. Which, as you can imagine, was a couple of things that did happen through my upbringing that age because I was always put in a spot where I had to try to meet people and make friends and the like. But I think it can sometimes shock people. Yeah, what your whole life is that you love other human beings, and I said, yeah, that was the transformation. The
Mm.
transformation was realizing that being authentic, being able to say that I was petrified of other human beings and that at times I hated on other human beings, gave me the ability to see that that was in my wiring and in as a function of the life I'd lived. It wasn't a function of who I was for myself at the heart of it. And that blew my mind. I'm like, oh my God. Now, not surprisingly, Stan, I went from 20 years of working in the background as a strategist, making salespeople really successful because I was not going to be the person who had to deal with the face to face, right? But when I got that transformation, suddenly I was able to step out of the shadows, start getting, and I start, much like you now, I do a lot of speaking engagements, but this podcast, for example, my ability and interest and passion for connecting with other human beings comes from a real deep love for what it looks like to have a relationship with another human being.
So, Kylie, if I can go back and just ask you a quick question. So, when you said you use that word transformation, I hit that transformation. And to me, that means you had to start showing up differently. What did that look like to you? How did you go through that transformation to start showing up intentional with intention?
Yeah, look, great question. And I'd say I'm reminded of for me, it's like the caterpillar butterfly journey. And you pointed this out before in your story about getting out of the comfort zone, right? And I had this view that, creating and being a particular way like that, showing up, this should be pleasant. It should be a good experience. But the moment that I started getting into that space, it was really uncomfortable. I was out of my depth. Things were happening that I couldn't make sense of. And, there was a point, Stan, where it was about 4 days. I could not understand what was going on. Was traveling and I was leading programs, and I flew home from Perth, and which is on the other side of the country here in Australia. And as I was on the plane watching this movie, I started crying, and I couldn't work out why I was crying. I was so upset. I'm like, I need to simplify my life. This is all too much. And I was like, I got home, and I hadn't seen the kids for it was about a week, and that because we'd just gone off the back of the school holidays. But then I came home, and normally when I come home from a trip, like I am pumped to see my kids, right? I was like, went straight to my bedroom. I spent 4 days in bed. 4 days. I could not. And at the time, my husband's like, what's going on with you? Like, there's nothing wrong. And I said, you don't understand. Honestly, that's what it took. 4 days of going between, I can't see how to do this. I don't know what's going on. There's something deeply wrong with me. I don't understand it. I feel completely depressed. I just was anxious about life, anxious about being out there with another human being. And that's actually what it took, the period of being able to having to just be with the darkness, I suppose, of my fear, and being able to lean into that. And I was blessed at the time, Stan, to have a coach at the time. And he said to me, Kylie, stop trying to rush. There's no expectation for you to do anything. And if all it means is that you put one foot out the door today,
Mm,
that's
mm.
that is a massive accomplishment. And that's what it took. It took allowing myself the space to just breathe into that. And then eventually each day I took and that was what it was like, Stan. One day I walked out the front door and he's like, great, just come back. The next day it was walk to the corner of the street, come back. The next day it was walking around the block. And I did that day by day by day until eventually I felt that I was okay to be out in the world again. And what I navigated was that part where the butterfly sheds its shell. So the caterpillar finally takes the shell off and becomes the butterfly. That experience that I went through was very much about, what does it look like now for me to no longer be afraid, to be in the world, being true to myself and not be fearful of other human beings.
That's a strong. There's so much packed in that. I mean, because for the longest time, because you love the science of the brain like I do, and as you know, you've got that whole amygdala going ape crap on you. It's basically, it throws 30,000, stuff that we either hear is made up, we believe, whatever, but we're fight and flight literally all day long.
Yeah.
And it isn't until we use what's called that reticular activation system and we put it out here and we say, how do I really want to show up? And I work, I'm sure you do too, work with a lot of clients, and that's the more mastery level of how do you want to show up? And what does that person look like? And then you've got to really start to kind of, as you said, go to the first mailbox and then the second mailbox. The other thing you said too that just came to my mind, but we've kind of talked a little bit on both sides here, Kylie. We talked a little bit about you got to get out of your comfort zone, and and then we've talked about, well, maybe it's only a step at a time. And, I heard a story last week and it just made me think of it. Would you jump in shark infested waters? Well, heavens no, I wouldn't do it. What if your child was in there? Oh, I'd be in
Mm,
there in a heartbeat.
mm,
So, sometimes, I had this conversation with a client last week, and I just said, you know what? Sometimes, necessity is, is the motherhood of urgency. We
mm,
need sometimes that urgency, and something has to happen that puts us in that comfort zone. So, it's a fine line, and that's why there are people like you out there, and hopefully myself, that are just pushing those people on a pace that is manageable, but
mm.
you have to get your clients uncomfortable at the same time.
Mm, absolutely. Now, there is one more thing I want to talk about with you before we jump off, and that is about servant leadership in particular. And I want to have this conversation with you because I know it's one of the things that you are passionate about, and you did talk about that in the context of, being selfless. But the reason I want to talk about it with you, Stan, is because I would like your view as an expert in this area, to really clarify what it means and why you think it's important. And I want to put the spotlight here, especially on those who may have a similar view. Certainly, we're in a time in this world where we've gone through movements like Black Lives Matters, the Me Too movement, and suddenly what we're seeing is the shift of the dial from the minorities to a more of an equality view, which a lot of the servant leadership has started to rise through that, right? Now, as an Indigenous woman, however, I noticed I had a misconception initially about servant leadership, and I realized that it was because of the word servant.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, I'm having a reaction to this term servant leadership, not because I know what it inherently is about. Because if I sat there and stopped and looked, I was like, no, I technically know what it's about. But I had a reaction to the word because as Aboriginal people in this country, that's pretty much how they were perceived. They were pretty much servants to others. And that was not a good experience. So I want to just put to bed for people this conversation. Anyone else who gets into the word, and here's the other reason I'm going to ask you about this, Stan, is we can very easily let our interpretations in life become reality. We can let things like our opinions about, and I'll give you another good example. Pablo Picasso had a quote about life's true meaning, right? Extraordinary human with his art, great quote. I post the quote and I get a reaction from a woman who made a comment about him being a misogynist.
Hmm.
And I was like, I didn't know how to respond. So I just stopped and thought about it. And I thought, okay, I get where she's coming from. Okay, clearly the guy maybe, and I had no idea about it. So there is a new level of insight there. Okay, great, I got that. But then I thought to myself, that's just not the game I'm playing, right? Every human being, the Maya Angelou said once, when we know better, we do better, right? And I just thought, well, there's just probably in his life for somebody to just say that occurs to me like there's been some whatever that was to be a human being who's out in the world, professing to live from life's meaning. And I just think that sometimes we need to be responsible for not allowing our interpretation of reality to be reality. So, servant leadership, Stan, please share with us, what it's about and anything else you want to now say, because I have just dumped a huge conversation on you. How about that one?
And you said we have to leave. I mean, that opens up a whole nother hour, which we won't do. But I will tell you, something that you said there is when it's servant leadership. Boy, you're right. That's a strong word. If you are familiar with Strength Finders, I have what's called woo and communication, which means I can typically go into a room and meet just about everybody and enjoy it. And some people don't. And when I look back on my career, Kylie, and I look back and I say, you know what? How much of that was people pleasing? How much of that was for me.
Mm,
And when I finally got away from the corporate world and I started to find my true soul in about 6 to 8 months, I started to realize, am I doing things for love or out of love? And that became servant leadership to me.
mm,
When I started not focusing, yes, I said, be a little, take care of yourself, first thing in the morning. And, but again, that was only, I call it doubling down on you. You need to double down on you. I do that maybe out of a little self love to take care of myself, but it's for love the rest of the day. It's taking care of my wife, my grandkids, my clients. If I'm not doing things for them, that to me is servant. If I'm doing it for me, if I'm only focused on how much money am I going to make on this, what's my return?
mm.
Well, I have to have a little concern, but that isn't the reason you do things on when you're a servant leader. You do it out of love, not for love.
Well, there you go. So much for the hour conversation. That was very short and sweet. No, certainly wasn't expecting that, and I think that's really beautiful, and it really defines. I think gets to the heart, I guess, of why it's truly important. And I think many people in the journey of leadership, it's a fine balance and an important balance to recognize when you're able to come from that place.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, to complete, Stan, I often will ask people to complete a sentence for me. And so I'm going to give you the sentence, and then your job is just to complete it for me. A leader is someone who.
Probably gave me that prompt, and a leader is someone who, the easy answer is someone who influences. But I can't help but go back and say it's someone who's authentic. And again, I think it's who's servant and who does things not for love, but out of love. I think that's a leader these days.
Mm, I love that one. I think it's far better when we don't have to think about what we think the answer is because it just does then
Absolutely.
come straight from the heart, right? So I think it's really interesting. It often happens when it is one of the questions and prompts I give people prior to booking, and it's interesting to see what happens when we actually go live and suddenly after the conversation, people are really connected to what's truly, you said it when you ask the why 3 times over, the thing that's really at the heart of it really speaks volumes. So. Look, Stan, I really want to thank you for being here today. Thank you for making it work on the different hours that we're on the other side of the world. Is there any final imparting message that you would like to share about why this work is so important to you?
No, again, it goes back to transformation and growth, and it's a big world out there. So even with Kylie and I think it's, if I can serve you, I would serve you. No, and never keep score. That's something that was told to me many years ago. Never keep score, and I love that. And if there is anything I can do, I know that on my website stangibsonspeaks.com, I do have on my resources tab my double down PDF, and if that can help anybody out there with the neuroscience and the habits around sleep, nutrition, around movement, around productivity, I just give stuff away. I'm at that season of life where what, I can do that, and it shouldn't even be this season of life. It should be every season of life, quite honestly. It's just unfortunate that I had to wait to this season of life to find out that that's the true gift of being a leader.
I think we all get there at some point, Stan. Thank you so much. Thanks for your gifts. And folks, we will put the links to Stan's website. Make sure you get a copy of that double down. I mean, we're now really at the tail end. Well, in the Southern Hemisphere, at the tail end of summer. On the Northern Hemisphere, you're at the tail end of the cold peak season. But it is a season where people do get very jolly. So if you got jolly over the Christmas season and New Year, then make sure you go to Stan's website and get his links to the double down because I have no doubt you're probably in need of a lot of sleep. Stan, again, thank you. You're incredible. And I love that you love to give from love. And with that, let's leave a lot of love in the world.
Thank you very much. I love everybody. Take care, and may you all enjoy these holidays ahead of us. Bless you.